Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy.
Hey, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh, and I'm here with co-host Rachel Timothy. And today is a little bit different. We are going to be sharing a version of Rachel's story that is appropriate for all ages. And Rachel, this is a conversation we have quite frequently when people ask us to come speak. Is it appropriate for kids or teenagers? Who should be there? And so we thought, why don't we give them a taste on what it can look like at an event when it's appropriate for all ages? What do you think?
Yeah. So we get contacted by schools and principals and youth groups, and they know that this material is important. But again, they want to know what you're going to share, and is it going to be PG, and, will it upset the parents and things like that. And I think giving the information in an age appropriate way is super valuable for children. Giving them that verbiage and knowledge, I think, will help them big time if they're faced with a situation, whether it's them or their friends. So I just think this is super important. And this could even be something that parents share with their middle school kid. They can listen to this podcast and it be informative for them as well.
Absolutely. So why don't we just start at the beginning? Tell us a bit, tell us how, so I guess I'll do two things. Number one, I'll give some overviews of themes. So those adults who are listening will know a bit about what to expect, and then we'll dive into your story. So the themes that we're going to be discussing will be grooming, gaslighting, the trickery that can happen with perpetrators, because they don't just, it's not just physical abuse, it's an emotional experience and can be very confusing. So we'll be talking about those two things, as well as internet safety and predators. And was there another topic? I think that was it.
You said grooming, gaslighting, and internet safety. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the bulk.
Like that was it. Okay. Sounds good. So why don't you tell us a bit about your story and when your grooming started?
So I think the reason that my story would be so important for kids to hear is, I was 9 years old when it started, and obviously I didn't know what was going on at the time. And so whenever somebody in my school started to show me a lot of special attention, and I knew of him as a teacher, as a coach, he was an elder of a church, he was part of a Christian quartet, he was highly respected by everybody. He was just known as a really, really good guy. And so I had no reason to be concerned that his attention towards me would lead to anything bad. I think we're taught stranger danger. And I think if you ask kids, do you take candy from a stranger? They would all say no. Well, do you take candy from somebody who has shown you love and attention? And, yeah, of course. That means, they care.
Well, and reality is not a stranger. This is a teacher. This is somebody who's in your world, who goes to church with your family and is a family friend, or, it's not typically strangers who, certainly that happens, but more often than not, we find it's people that already have a bit of that like, know, and trust factor.
Yeah. And so, kids might wonder, am I the only one? Somebody in my world is doing things that I know is not right. I'm probably the only one because it's supposed to be stranger danger. But helping children realize that's not usually the case. Actually, it is usually somebody that somebody that everybody else sees as good and safe, doesn't necessarily mean they're good and safe to you behind closed doors. And so whenever somebody starts to show you special attention, that does not mean they're bad. That does not mean that they're, out to get you. There's a lot of good people in the world who really do truly care about you. Whenever we start to see isolation, though, for example, whenever an adult wants to get you alone, They want to see you by yourself. They want to see you maybe after school to help them clean up, or after youth group, or see if they could take you home, or just ways, trying to figure out ways to get alone with you. That's not normal. It's not normal for an adult to want to be around a child alone. And especially in this day and age, it's just, better for all the sorts of reasons. But at the same time, another big red flag would be if they ever want you to keep secrets. Maybe they share something with you personally that is something that, if you shared, it would hurt them for other people to know. And so they ask you to keep it quiet. Again, there's no reason for an adult to be doing that with a child. So for me, whenever my coach began that process and began to make me feel special, he started talking to me about basketball, which he knew I loved. And he would talk about how great I was going to be. And he would talk about how he was my biggest fan. And he couldn't wait to see how good I would grow up to be if I'd make it to the WNBA. And, don't forget him whenever I do. And just all these different compliments that would make any child feel amazing. He would get me out of class. He would send notes to my teacher and have me come to his classroom and sit behind his desk, and we would talk and talk and talk. And I mean, he'd make me laugh. He'd make me feel special. And so whenever it started, that's really all it was. But eventually, he started to give me compliments that were more about how I looked or how I made him feel, which again is not appropriate for an adult to do. And I think pausing right there and letting you guys know that if an adult begins to do those things right there, that is a great time to tell another adult. Because if it is completely innocent, then there's no problem in telling another adult. But if it isn't, if there is something behind it, it will also protect you, hopefully, in the sense of letting other people know what's going on to where he maybe won't proceed.
So grooming is the process where a perpetrator, it's maybe love bombs. They are grooming, they're getting their claws, so to speak, in your heart and in your mind. And so they are often telling you how great you are, but then also potentially ignoring you the next day.
Yes.
Grooming is a very manipulative practice. In fact, intermittent reinforcement is one of the strongest forms of reinforcement, which means you want the praise.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you don't get it, you think, how can I get more of that?
Yeah.
And so your attention comes to, how can I get that person to praise me again? Or how can I be in their good graces? Or how can I get that affirmation? And so it's a really strong form of manipulation, and is often the first thing that happens when somebody is a perpetrator. They try to get their kind of claws in someone's heart and mind first. And so the thing I'll point out about your story is that this was in public. This was in school. This was in a safe place. You had no real reason as a 9-year-old to think that you shouldn't be safe around your teacher. And he made you and elevated you to feel so special that when the attention was gone, you began to crave it and then long for it and want it. And so then as things progressed, he already had a bit of your heart because you wanted that affirmation and that connection, which meant you didn't want to let him down.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there would be times when he would have me come to his class quite often. And then all of a sudden it was like he dropped me. Like I wasn't important anymore. He wouldn't look my direction. He wouldn't call me out of class. He wouldn't even really talk to me. He would act like I didn't exist. And so I remember being on edge, going to school every day, wondering, is this going to be a day where he likes me, doesn't like me? Did I do something wrong to make him not like me? What can I do to make him like me again? Because I didn't want to lose what had already been formed. And that was, that special attention that made me feel good.
And as adults, we think, I think one of the telling signs about your story is that you really felt like this was a relationship, that you felt that he really did care about you. So even as you got older, it took a long time to come to that realization of, oh my gosh, why would an adult man or woman or whoever want such to spend one-on-one time with a child.
And it wasn't just that I was like, oh, that, I'm infatuated, or, like I made this all up in my head that he loved me. No, he would say those things. He would say, that him and I, if I told people about us, about what we had, it would hurt him. He would lose his wife, his kid, his job. And so I knew that the us was something. So it wasn't just that I was a kid who saw, maybe twisted something. It was real. As far as what he was saying to me, and it felt like a relationship because that's what he made it seem like.
Yeah. So that grooming piece is step one often. And then the second step is often this gaslighting piece where the confusion happens. Does he like me? Does he not like me? Telling, I know at one point you told him, I don't like this. And he said, well, you started it. That's a form of gaslighting, of saying, this is your idea, and mind manipulation where the victim gets confused. Is it? What's going on here? What's truth? Or you feel something and they say, oh, well, that's not the way you feel isn't true. This is how you should feel. And yet it's conflicting. And so gaslighting brings up a lot of confusion.
It does. And I think that confusing piece is often what keeps kids from wanting to speak up. What if I'm wrong? What if this is all in my head? What if this isn't actually a bad thing? Or what if it looks bad on me? I think a lot of kids, whenever that confusion piece hits, they want to speak out. They start to feel the turmoil in their heart. But who do you tell, and and that's a question I'll ask you. Who do you tell? How do you tell it? And do you just stop at telling one person? Does it really seem like it's that big of a deal?
Yeah. You're asking me to answer?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just say what I've learned in working in this space is that oftentimes kids will try to tell, and they often start with the people they feel the most comfortable with. Guess who that is? Their friends. And so their friends, they'll start to tell their friends little bits. Remember, any little bit we get, just know it's the tip of the iceberg, because people are not often going straight to the root. They're,
Right.
They're just giving you a snippet of, I get hurt sometimes, or, this is, does your mom do this as a punishment, or, whatever it is. There might be a little bit, and they often start with their friends. And so one of the things that we've learned is to teach friends what to do when that happens to them, or if somebody tells them something that's confusing to them or hard to hear, or abuse in some way, what do they do with that information? Yeah. And I know that's part of your story too.
Yeah. So, I'll keep going a little bit, but for example, whenever he started to talk about us as boyfriend, girlfriend, and, he figured out ways where I could get to his house, and it was going to be kind of like our little secret. Well, it was our secret. And the first time that I went, he had a plan where he gave me a book, and whenever I got home that next day, I was going to ask if I could return the book to his house. He lived just a couple of houses down from me. And so I did. And the first time I went to his house, it was completely fine. He was very friendly, nothing inappropriate. Flirting, I would say, but nothing else. And then the next time that I went, I remember him pulling out pictures of kids and showing it to me, and coming up with this incredible idea that if he takes pictures of me, we might be able to make money, and how fun would that be? And then I could get my parents Christmas gifts, and, it would help him pay bills. And it just seemed like this fun, innocent idea. And I remember saying yes to it and allowing him to take pictures of me.
And these were just normal, fun, silly, goofy, clothes on, just regular pictures.
No big deal. And he continued to show me attention and praise at school. Well, the next time that he invited me over secretly to his house, instead of like riding my bike around town, I would stop in at his place just for a little bit. And this time when he showed me an envelope of pictures, it was kids without clothes on. And I think he recognized my response, because I'm sure it was horror on my face. But immediately he justified it and would say things like, this is just the beautiful way that God made you. If we take pictures like this, you're literally honoring God. And so he twisted it to where a child would think that this was a good idea. I was not comfortable with it, but I was there with him, with this person that I wanted to please. And so I agreed to it. But is that really agreeing? It's more like, it was manipulation. And I can look back now and see that it was not a child's choice. It was his doing. It was his abuse. And so I did. I allowed him to take pictures of me. And that was one of those times when I said to him later, this didn't feel good. And I didn't like it. It made me feel yucky. And he said, well, it was your idea. You're the one that wanted to do it. And so in those gaslighting, manipulation words, it brought on a shame that I didn't want anybody to know what I had done. But really, it wasn't me that did it. It was him. And so I think that's really hard for a child too, the embarrassment of it. Mm-hmm. There's nobody else out there that would have done what I did. That's just simple. It's not true. It's not true. Kids get manipulated in this way all the time. It happens in America way too often. And that's why we want to talk out about it. We want kids to know they're not alone. We want kids to know that their voice in coming forward will be heard and that this shouldn't be happening to anybody.
When quote unquote bad things happen, we're told, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And so when a quote bad thing happens to us, we can internalize that to say, well, maybe I'm a bad person. And so part of that shame comes on, especially when there's high manipulation happening, where we can, it's what happens. I found is a lot of times victims will say, they'll take on all the blame themselves rather than placing it where it should be on the manipulator himself. And so especially as kids, it's hard to differentiate that because your world is so small. And so a bad thing happens and that shame comes in, and then it's like, well, this is my fault, or, and it snowballs from there, which then keeps you quiet even more.
Yeah. And, as a kid, you might just remember that one piece, that one disobedience. For me, I went over to my coach's house without asking for permission. Well, am I going to get in trouble for that when I get home? Like, I'm the one that was disobedient. So if any child out there is listening and, maybe they did something in disobedience to get to the place where they got hurt, maybe they were drinking, maybe they were, at a place they weren't allowed to be at and they got hurt. It doesn't matter. Like, that piece doesn't matter. You were hurt. It was not your fault. You didn't cause it. And adults should respond in that way. And I think they will.
Absolutely. And so we know that for you, this lasted several years. And then when you started coming forward, you learned not to just tell one person, but to tell multiple people until you found the person who would stand by you. Because some people didn't get it. Some people thought it was too much. Some people, shrunk away, but some people stood up for you and really started to support you.
Yeah. So after the pictures, later there came actual sexual abuse, and there was touching, and there was beyond what it was bad. And so one of the things that I did in my child brain was I would shut down, and I wouldn't be able to remember all that happened. And it's because the pain was too much. But that made it really hard to explain to somebody why I felt as bad as I felt. I didn't fully know. I couldn't comprehend. I didn't know what a flashback was. There'd be times that I would be laying in bed and this image would come into my head of a man on top of me. It wasn't even my coach, and it was a different man, and I didn't know who it was. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening, and then it was gone. But I felt sick to my stomach. I felt pain in my body, but I didn't know what a flashback was. I didn't know that my coach had sold me at different times to other men, and I was literally being trafficked because my brain had shut down during that painful time. And that happens. Like when you're going through something so traumatic, especially as a child, you have this protective measure inside of you that makes it to where you're not in it in that moment. You kind of hide, basically. And so, yes, it's wonderful for that moment, but it doesn't mean that the pain goes away. And then there can be confusion, and it can be very hard to speak the words. I remember there would be times when I hurt so badly and I wanted to tell somebody what was going on, but I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. And it was like it was stuck in my throat. And so one of the things that helped me was writing. And I would write and write and write to nobody in particular. I was just writing and sharing my feelings. And at times things would come out. But that was an easier way for me to share with somebody what was going on.
So dissociation is when your brain kind of, it's like your soul goes, like your body's there, but you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the protective mechanism. So you aren't fully engaged in all of what's happening. But like you said, you don't quite consciously remember what happened, but your body still does. And so your body is still responding to the trauma. Can you describe or give a definition of what a flashback is?
In a flashback, you are reliving in all five senses. Sorry. I was thinking of the movie.
There
Okay,
could be a sixth one. Hey, you never know.
Yeah, you never know. In all five senses, you literally are reliving it. So, I mean, you can taste as if you're there. You see as if you're there. Your body feels as if you're there. You hear the things as if you're there. And it can last for like 2 seconds. It can last longer. For me, it would come in almost like a movie reel. And it would just show a clip, and sometimes it would repeat that clip repeatedly, and then a little bit more would come, and sometimes it would come out of order, and sometimes it would be part of one memory mixed with another memory. But eventually it all comes together like a puzzle, and I'm able to make sense of what was going on. Oftentimes flashbacks come whenever you feel safe. So I think it's interesting that when I was in my bed at home is when I would sometimes have those flashbacks, because I felt safe there and my body was relaxed enough to allow a little bit of those memories to come forward. But it is a piece of your past. It's not something that you're not crazy. You're not multiple personality or anything like that. This is very, very normal for somebody who's experienced trauma.
Yeah, I was going to say it's your body's way to handle trauma, and your body and brain. And so the flashbacks can be scary in themselves. You found that writing has helped you. What else do you do if you are experiencing a flashback?
Oftentimes what we call grounding exercises. You remind yourself of where you are in the present moment, because all five senses are in that past moment. You have to try to feel the present. You need to smell the present. You're looking for certain objects. Maybe you're counting 5 brown objects in your room, things that bring you back to the present. Having somebody there with you is if you have somebody, letting them know what's going on, like, this is what I see, and they can sometimes help you stay present in that moment too. But I've also learned flashbacks, they need to be felt. They need to be seen. It's your body's way of remembering. It's a piece of who you are, and it hurts, and it's terrible, but it's part of the healing process. But I would never, as much as possible, do that with somebody with you.
And so would you say that that it's part of the healing journey to allow those flashbacks to come rather than continuing to push them down? And then the idea is as you feel them and as you experience it and as you write it and you release it, eventually they don't feel so heavy anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think, let's say as a friend, you have another, one of your friends is experiencing or saying, hey, I keep having this flash that comes into my head that is really, really bad. And it's of this person that I know, and I don't know what to do with it. as a friend, you can be there to say, I think that sounds like a flashback. I think this is something we need to talk to a trusted adult about. Those are things that if you don't know what they are, you might go, that sounds crazy, but that's not the truth. So now that you know, you can help your friend get the help that they need so that they can start healing and moving forward.
What happens in a flashback, or with kind of the way our body and brain responds to trauma, is that we experience these emotional triggers. And so, if you think about falling off your bike, you remember it as a memory.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I remember that happened. But when you are reminded of a traumatic experience, like you mentioned, all of your senses, your emotions get involved, and it triggers you, and you can stay triggered and emotional for weeks sometimes.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do is, as you process through that flashback, the idea is that it makes it from this triggered state and moves it from one part of your brain to the other, so it becomes more of a memory, and it no longer owns your senses like it may have in the past.
Exactly. I think another important thing to bring up is, part of my story was I hurt and I did want help, but I didn't want to hurt my coach. I didn't want anybody to know that it was him at that time. I wanted to protect him because I cared about him. And in my mind, I thought he cared about me too. And so even though I was having these flashbacks and I was realizing that there were some really bad things that have happened, even though I couldn't make complete sense of it, I didn't want to throw him under the bus. And I think that's pretty common with kids whenever they've been hurt by somebody that they love. You don't want to think that maybe this isn't love. Maybe that this adult really doesn't care about you. It's really hard to wrap your brain around that.
Well, and if you think of kids experiencing black and white thinking, there is very little gray in a child's mind, because if this happens, everything's over, or I won't. I mean, you guys remember what it was like to have a breakup. You're like, my life is over, nothing, it's very black and white and short-term thinking. And so the amount of fear of, if I hurt him, if you wanted his attention in some ways. And so that can be a very confusing place. I don't want this to happen, but really you didn't quite know what to do about it, because of, you were a child and your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old. And so there's no real way for a child to be able to process through and have pros and cons and think about all the solutions that are out there. They're literally in the moment trying to survive.
Yeah. And I think what I would love for any child out there who is in that situation to hear is, you feel like, oh, I don't want to hurt him. But in reality, not telling is actually going to not only allow him to have more victims, because it won't only just be you, but it'll also keep him as a predator. And I mean, my thought is, truth, whenever you let truth out, that is when healing happens for everybody. And yes, it maybe is painful in that very beginning. And maybe there's things that change, like you're not going to be around that person anymore. And, there's different things, counseling or whatever, there's different things that change. But that doesn't mean that life can't go back to being good. That doesn't mean that everything's over. There is a future. There is a beautiful life ahead of you. And this could just be a small piece of it if you deal with it now, if you approach the situation now. We want to think, if I just don't think about it, if I just act like it didn't happen, if I just don't tell anybody, I'll be fine. I can handle this. It is like a wound that festers and festers and gets worse and gets worse. It doesn't get better by not talking about it. It'll grow and get worse. And the more years that pass, the more victims that come, and the more pain that you live in from suffering in silence. And so even though it feels extremely scary, and no child should have to have that pressure of coming forward, it really, truly is in the best interest of everybody. And yes, it's painful in the moment, but I promise you it's worth it.
Absolutely. And there are lots of options. And I think as a child, it can be easy to think of black and white, but there's lots of options, and you are never stuck. and finding a trusted adult that you can be honest with is step one.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I feel like I'm a good example of, some bad things, some really, really bad things happened, but I'm doing really well now. And I'm able to, help you run an organization, and do art and counsel other survivors. And I'm a mom and I'm a wife and, I'm a huge part of the community and I'm living my life to the fullest. And so life after abuse is absolutely possible. It doesn't have to define you.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, this experience happened, 20 some years ago. The world has changed. And so, although this is still happening in schools, most likely all over the country, there's also other ways that abuse can happen, sometimes even without being touched. So, why don't you talk a bit about internet safety and what you've learned through the cyberspace?
Yeah, so I want to real quick define what the word trafficking means. And maybe you guys have heard that before, and maybe you've, watched a movie or two about, Sound of Freedom or whatever, where it talks about um, kids being taken and never seen again and sold. Is that trafficking? Yes. But there are so many other ways that people can be trafficked, and it is happening all over the country. Anytime somebody makes money off of you, off of a child, that's trafficking. And if it's sexually making money off of you, that's called sex trafficking. And so you don't even have to be touched to be sex trafficked. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're on your phone or you're on your device and somebody begins messaging with you, and you think that maybe it's a child your own age. They're posing as somebody that you think is another kid. But in actuality, it's a grown man, 3 states away. And he starts asking you about yourself. And so you share like, "Oh yeah, I got this annoying little sister that won't leave me alone. And, I have to, help her do everything. And it just drives me nuts." Well, then maybe one of the next times he says to you, "If you don't send me a picture, I know about your little sister. I'm going to come hurt her." Well, whoa, shoot. That's right. He does know I have a little sister. I did share a little bit of information with him. Maybe he really does know where I live and could get to her. Okay, I'll send one picture. Well, then he wants more. "If you don't send me a video, then I'm going to show this picture to your parents and tell them what you did." And before long, you're sending everything that he's asking of you, demanding of you. And then he will take those pictures and he will sell them online. You could have been in your bedroom by yourself, never touched by anybody, but you were just trafficked because of those images, because of those videos. And it's not your fault. It happens all the time. Predators are all the time on our devices with kids and are trying to lure them into doing things that they really don't want to do. And so this is a way that we need to be smart about who we're talking to. We need to be very careful about sending pictures and videos, because that is a huge, huge deal. And it is literally trafficking.
Yeah. And so it's all, the goal of this is not to scare us all, like to scare everyone. The goal is to really open our eyes to saying what is, when we know, we can catch it and we can spot red flags and we can say no quickly and we can tell a trusted adult more quickly and we can get the help that we need faster, because suffering in silence only hurts you more when you tell and can tell the truth and start the healing journey. It really, in years, you'll be grateful you did.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think that about internet safety that you think we should bring up?
I think it's also important to know that, kids sometimes will ask for pictures of classmates or your friends, or boys in school will trick, or convince a girl to send pictures. And guys, it's sending child pornography is what that is. And it's illegal. And so police could get involved very easily whenever it's caught on any sort of cyber internet safety program. And so be very, very careful. Do not send those pictures. Do not send videos. Don't ask for them. Don't send them. It is a huge, huge deal. And I just think being very wise about that stuff will go a very long way, because that can stick with you. Once you send it, you don't get it back.
Yeah. We've heard stories of kids who got tricked into sending pictures, and then they were tricked into sending money. And then it turns into it just gets deeper and deeper. And so we want to nip it in the bud before it even starts.
Yeah. And like, you guys are kids. Be kids, have fun. Don't worry about, you don't want to have to worry about this sort of stuff. This is adult stuff that is, not for your brain to have to handle right now. Play the games that are appropriate for your age. Don't go above and beyond that. Don't try to rush growing up. Live in the here and now, because you will always wish that you did.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Rachel, is there anything else from your story that you think would be relevant to middle schoolers?
I did share with friends. Those were the first people that I shared with, and I thought they did a fantastic job. They first told a teacher, who then told the teacher, then told the principal, and then they told my parents. And unfortunately, from there, it wasn't handled very well, and so things were not done that needed to be done. But the fact that schools are becoming more educated, becoming more trauma informed, they're understanding that it's normal if you don't have all of the memories, or if things don't always make sense. They're learning all of that. And so, I think as friends, they did a fantastic job. I wish that it would have been handled a little bit differently, but you have to try. And I think when I talk to those friends now, they're all grateful that they did their part. And I'm grateful they did too. So
if you are a teacher or a parent and you see a child with concerns, or your child comes to you with a friend with a concern, as Rachel mentioned, the Broca's part of the brain literally turns off and you cannot say the words. Mm-hmm. And so it can be hard as, what's going on? Why are you crying? You're trying to get something out of a child and they literally can't talk. And so there's a reason for that. And what we've learned is to say, can you write down 2 or 3 words and give them a pen and paper and ask them to write? Because I think sometimes as adults, we can get frustrated and be like, well, if you don't really want help anyway, or, I know you experienced that with police and hospitals later on. And so just an idea and a strategy for us as adults to be more trauma informed when we're working with kids or anyone, because that happens even to adults.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't want to put any fear or anything into children and thinking like, oh my goodness, I have this one teacher who, said, good job. And now I'm scared. And, there's really good teachers out there. I don't want you thinking every teacher that gives you a compliment is bad. So don't hear that. I don't want teachers to get a bad rap here, because teachers do an incredible job. But at the same time, it's when it goes to that isolation stage and the abuse begins the secrets that
and the back and forth. It's one thing for somebody's personality to be loving to everyone and warm to everyone and just a cheerleader type of person, right? But if they're singling you out and it's wishy-washy, I love you, I hate you, that kind of experience, that's a red flag.
Yeah. And then pay attention to your own ways of coping, like cutting. If you're cutting, that's a sign that something is going wrong. There's something that's not right. Eating disorders are another one. Constant headaches or urinary tract infections are ideas that there's something going on. Nightmares, flashbacks, isolating yourself, not all of a sudden not wanting to be around your friends, dressing different, hanging out with a different crowd. There's a lot of different indicators, and sometimes we don't recognize the war that's going on within, because we're wanting so badly to be a kid. We don't want to stop and deal with what's going on, but our actions will speak for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to add?
I think I could talk for days. But,
knowledge is power,
the
guys. I think absolutely. Knowledge is power. As adults, as kids, the more that we can understand our boundaries and get help if we need it, I think the stronger everyone will be.
Yeah.
So if you are listening and you're a middle schooler, thank you for taking the time to learn a bit more about Rachel's story and how you can keep yourself and your community safe. If you're a parent or teacher or youth group leader and you're interested in having us come speak to your kids, although Rachel's story is horrific, if you've read her book, definitely get that. That's a great first way to hear an overview of her story. She is very, very good at sharing a version that's appropriate for children because her heart is to protect children. End of story. So get in touch with us and let us know if you're interested in booking us to speak. This is one of our favorite things to do. So teachers, churches, even home events are possible. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like and subscribe, comment below your takeaway, what red flag you learned about or is the most interesting to you. Or if you have anything to add about some red flags or things that middle schoolers might need to hear, we'd love to hear more from you in the comments. So with that being said, thank you, Rachel, for sharing your story today. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.